Welcome back to another episode of Stand on Guard. I'm your host, David Creighton. Thank you so much for joining me on this Saturday morning. Hope your weekend looks a little better than mine. We've got another foot of snow coming for the Ottawa area, and I hate shoveling snow. When we come back, it's my real pleasure to have my friend, Chris Barber, Big Red from the Freedom Convoy. He will be joining us for a conversation. We'll be right back with that. We need political change, but we also need to resolve to resist. So it's the third anniversary of Trudeau invoking the Emergencies Act, and my guest today is Chris Barber. Of course, you all know Chris from not only the Freedom Convoy, but this is the guy who's been involved in the longest mischief trial in history. And I was there from day one. It was a weekend after Labor Day, uh, 2 years ago this September. And we're still waiting for a verdict in this, but we'll get to that in a minute. But this is Flag Day today. I'd totally forgotten. It's the 60th anniversary of the Canadian flag. And of course, the Canadian flag was very prominent during the Freedom Convoy. And for some reason, that upset some people. But now the flag is back in fashion again. And 3 years ago, yesterday, Valentine's Day 2022, Justin Trudeau invokes the Emergencies Act. And never forget that day. Now, take us back, Chris, if you can, to 3 years ago. It's freezing in Ottawa, just like it is right now. And you've been protesting peacefully, very peacefully, for about 3 weeks in the nation's downtown core. Everybody's having a great time, except a few people who can't stand the exhaust fumes and the complaining about things. But everybody's generally really excited about change in Canada. We're affecting the government. Trudeau is listening, even though he doesn't want to. He won't meet with you, but he's forced to listen. Pierre Poilievre's come down with coffee and donuts. He's listening. There seems to be a sea change in this country. Then Trudeau invokes the Emergencies Act. What were your feelings at that time when the full force of the government came down on your head?
Well, obviously, we were there. Like you said, it was the most peaceful protest in Canadian history. If the Canadian flag being waved in Ottawa on February 2022 offends you, then you're obviously not, a patriotic Canadian who wanted to stand up to government overreach. The government had been infringing on our freedoms for how many years throughout the mandates? It didn't seem like they were going away. The government kept pushing, and saying it was like a little carrot in front of the rabbit, saying, "Hey, we'll release these here at a certain time." And the thing that we heard the most from Canadians as we traveled across this country on the world's longest convoy was, "Don't leave until you have answers. Don't leave until the government listens. Don't leave until the government releases these mandates against innocent Canadians who just wanted their lives back."
Yeah, and that. Did you think 3 years later that you would be waiting for a verdict from a judge here in Ottawa, and that you would be put on trial for a mischief? And that's all there really is to it. It's a mischief charge. Did you really think you'd be still waiting around for a verdict from anybody 3 years later?
I've spent 49 years of my life never having handcuffs on, never being in the back of a police car, never seeing the inside of a jail cell, always having amazing experiences other than the odd traffic violation here and there from law enforcement. And to enter the court system, the justice system in Canada, and 3 years later be waiting for a verdict. I mean, their trial started September 5th, 2023. And we didn't end that trial until, what was it? It was just about September of 2024. And
Yeah, yeah.
if that's the way the justice system in this country works, the heaviest evidence they had against any of us, I guess, was the fact that somebody blew a horn in the city of Ottawa. We
Yeah,
were there
that's
peacefully protesting. I didn't have a truck there at that time. I removed my truck from downtown Ottawa when law enforcement asked me to. All I was doing was advocating for people to come out and stand their charter rights, their Canadian rights to protest against the government at that time. And that's all we were doing, was advocating for more people to show up. If more people showed up, we have the power in numbers, the power in the people. That was one thing that we wanted. The worst thing was the best thing was to have a conversation with our sitting prime minister and talk about when we were going to get our lives back.
Now, it's interesting you mentioned the fact that the prosecution, the Crown, really hasn't presented much at all. And I've been there for 95% of the trial dates. And I listened very carefully to the evidence. And I kept saying, oh, when's it coming? When are you going to present something tangible here? Because everything they presented was mind-bogglingly in your favor and in Tamara's favor. And I couldn't believe they kept playing sound bites and videos and social media exchanges that all said the same thing: peaceful protest, peaceful protest, peaceful protest. And it's like the Crown was deaf, dumb, and blind to all of this. They just couldn't understand that their evidence was somehow lacking. So I thought it was a kangaroo court. Obviously, this is a political trial, as far as I'm concerned, from day one, which is why I took a stand. I don't pretend I was ever completely objective about this. I thought this was a political court. This was a political action taken by the government, taken by all layers of the government. It's true. You're being charged by the provincial government, but Justin Trudeau is there. The municipal government's there. This is government per se that did not want to listen to the people, and they've done a horrible job of presenting their case. They have it has been a gong show, and I've described it that way time and time again in the writing I've done and in the broadcasts I've done about this trial. So I'm looking at this, and I think we're awaiting a verdict now in March. March 12th seems to come.
Yes, March 12th.
Yeah. How are you feeling about that? I don't want you to make a prediction, but how are you feeling about that verdict right now?
Well, we ask ourselves on a regular basis why this trial has taken so long, and it kind of makes sense now. You can see how they've taken all the other protesters and the trials of other peaceful protesters, and they've run case law. So they've done everything in their power to try and build that case law against the main organizers. And we'll see that, in my mind, I think that's why it's taken this long. The only thing they have to go on is if you were in Ottawa in February of 2022 when the government didn't want you there, you were standing against government tyranny, basically. They wanted to build that into that you were essentially guilty of mischief just because you were there. And that's what they've done for the last 3 years. They've built a lot of case law against us. They've tried to run the Coots border crossing in as evidence against us when Coots had nothing to do with Ottawa. There was Canadian protesters in Alberta protesting their fundamental rights. We were fundamentally protesting our rights in Ottawa. And when it comes down to it, at the end of the day, this is Justin Trudeau's ego. His ego was bruised through February. We made him look like the fool of a leader that he is. And this is his ego, and this is Doug Ford's ego. And Doug Ford and Justin Trudeau have done everything in their power to use the judicial system to punish us. And then Stephen Bell said that, the Ottawa police chief at the time, that they would, everything in their power they would do to hunt you down and prosecute you to the full extent of the law. And that's exactly what they've done for the last 3 years.
That well, that's precisely what they have done. And you noted on X recently about this class action suit, which I couldn't believe was still active. But are you still being threatened with some sort of class action suit for what, by at least one of these aggrieved partners in Ottawa here, and this other lawyer who's been running around with this for the last couple of years? Is that still a real threat?
Very much so, yeah. Zexi Lee, Ottawa citizen, and also on government payroll through the CRA, Canadian government, was headhunted by lawyer Paul Champ in downtown Ottawa and members of City Council to find someone to be the face of the lawsuit when they seen the amount of money coming in through the GoFundMe and the Gives to Go, all of which was frozen by the government and through the banking system in Canada. and remains frozen to this day. 3 years later, $5.5 million sits in an escrow account right now. Lawyer Paul Champ downtown Ottawa is suing. And remember, citizens, this is most lawyers get 30% of their earnings for any win. So it's over $1 million in Paul Champ's pocket if he wins this class action lawsuit and takes just that 5.5. But that's not enough for Paul Champ. He wants $300 million from organizers from Ottawa. And he wants to add the donor class to that lawsuit too. So if you donated $25 to the Freedom Convoy, you could potentially be liable for that and be sued by lawyer Paul Champ in downtown Ottawa through Zach Seeley and citizens of Ottawa. Now, because somebody honked a horn in Ottawa or because somebody smelled diesel fumes, I'm sorry. The government locked us down for 3 years or 2 years prior to this. And a lot of Canadians lost a lot of rights across this country.
Yeah, I've been in contact with a couple of folks, well, a few folks who were donors to the Freedom Convoy, who were, of course, included on that list. But of course, that list of donors was illegally hacked, and a lot of people forget that. And it was released to the government, to the media, and it was illegally hacked. And yet, they're going to use that list to go after, potentially, to go after donors, people who just provided funds. And this class action suit could expand to that. So I think we need to do, well, I need to do some work, and I think anybody who cares about justice needs to highlight the fact that this was an illegally hacked list that should never have been admissible in the first place. And if anybody suffers financially as a result of that hack, there's something wrong here. So
somebody's already suffered, and that's the thing.
Go ahead.
We need to remember that when those names were released for the donor class for the Freedom Convoy, a single mother in British Columbia, a waitress, lost her bank accounts. Her bank accounts were seized. Law enforcement agencies, government enforcement, anyone that was associated with the government was essentially, a police officer from Windsor who donated $50 to the Freedom Convoy was put on leave. And that's the case all across this country. The government infringed on our rights so badly after that. They didn't just go after the people that organized the Freedom Convoy. They went after anybody that donated to or supported.
No, that's exactly it. They persecuted as many people as possible. What do you think is the legacy of the Freedom Convoy? 3 years from now, we've still got Justin Trudeau as prime minister. Hopefully, his days are numbered. But what do you think the legacy of that wonderful month of freedom is for Canada?
I think there'll be history books wrote on it. I think that we're winning this narrative. The government went so hard to use legacy media, any means possible, to demonize the Freedom Convoy. Right from day one, we've seen from evidence through the POEC that the government messaging that we're just going to trash these people. We're going to make them look like Justin Trudeau's words. Racist and white supremacists and all these other misogynist. He demonized innocent Canadians who'd had enough of after over 2 years of federal mandates, provincial mandates. The truth is always going to come out, and I believe we're on the winning side of history here. I believe people are seeing exactly what happened throughout that time, and we're winning this. This has been a tough road for Trudeau's regime ever since February 2022. It knocked them down a point when they watched innocent protesters being beaten, tear gas, pepper sprayed, and rubber bulleted on Parliament Hill for simply standing. You remember that a lot of protesters were just there. They just had a flag in their hand. They just wanted to be heard. They didn't have a truck running anywhere in the streets. They didn't have a vehicle anywhere. They just had themselves peacefully, civilly protesting.
Yeah, and I was there from beginning to end. I was there when martial law was declared, and of course, people always forget that Trudeau liked to justify the Emergencies Act on the basis of the blockades at Coutts and in Southern Ontario. Those were over. Both of those blockades had ended when he invoked the Emergencies Act. So he had absolutely no excuse. And certainly there should not have, and he always said this would be geographically precise. And so he targeted Ottawa for absolutely no reason either, because there was no illegality, there was no protest going on there that was violent. It was all peaceful. And I always have to emphasize that because people forget that Trudeau completely lied about everything when he invoked the Emergencies Act. He said it would not suppress free speech. It would not suppress freedom of assembly. It would not suppress peaceful protest. And that's exactly, of course, what it was designed to do, which really leads me into, I think, an interesting question and also a thoughtful analysis from you on this, because Pierre Trudeau, Justin's pop, if that is indeed Justin's father, if it's not Fidel Castro, Pierre Trudeau, had he not repatriated the Constitution in his last term of office, in his last 4 years, he would have been remembered for one thing and one thing alone: invoking the War Measures Act in 1970 during the October crisis against the FLQ. Once again, totally unnecessary. There was a crisis in Montreal, and the whole country was under martial law. But that's the way Trudeau's behaved. But he would have been remembered for only the War Measures Act, because that was the only consequential thing Pierre Trudeau really did during his time up until the Constitution. Do you think Justin Trudeau's days are numbered? I'm still not 100% believing that, because I think he might find a way to hang on, to stay in, if there's an earlier election. But if he's gone this year, if he's gone next month after the Liberal leadership, and they possibly put Mark Carney in, probably put Mark Carney, do you think Trudeau will be remembered for anything else except invoking the Emergencies Act?
Well, no, I don't think he will be remembered for anything else other than the Emergencies Act, and how he just the narcissistic attitude, his ego took over or hold of citizens, and the amount of, he's a tyrant is what I would like to refer him to. He's going to be remembered for that. People are going to know, and his legacy is damaged forevermore because of this. It's been damaged for the last 3 years, especially. His sentiment towards the people's sentiment towards him has been, his polling is in the garbage. And unfortunately, they found a cue here through the U.S. presidency to try and gain some points in Canadian popularity in the Liberal Party, because of their demonization using the media once against Donald Trump and these potential tariffs. And I like it to remind people that the carbon tax goes up April 1st, and a lot of people don't seem to be concerned about that, but we're concerned about something happening in another country right now. If we had leadership in this country, like what the U.S. does, and what Donald Trump cares about the United States, if Justin Trudeau cared enough about Canada, we wouldn't be in this position right now with Donald Trump.
Yeah, I'm glad you raised the question. I was going to get to that, because I love Donald Trump. I love what he's doing. I don't think the tariff is it's a good idea. Obviously,
No,
I don't think we need a trade war. I know you don't either. But I think he's put Pierre Poilievre in a very difficult position, and I wrote about this yesterday. And I'm begging Donald Trump to just say, let us have an election. Stop throwing Justin Trudeau and the Liberals a lifeline by going after Canada every day, because Trudeau knows how to exploit that. The Liberals know how to exploit that, the anti-American, the anti-Trump thing, because they want to run against Donald Trump. They don't want to run against Pierre Poilievre. They think they can win an election against Donald Trump, and that's every time Trump talks about the 51st state or talks about annexing Canada, Justin Trudeau is saying, I love it, yeah, because he can exploit that. So I think he's put Pierre Poilievre in a difficult situation. And there's a rally this afternoon in Ottawa here at the Rogers Centre, and I've been advertising it every day. I encourage everybody to go out and find out what Pierre Poilievre's up to, what he's thinking, because he should be the next Prime Minister of Canada. And I think we need a new Prime Minister to negotiate with Donald Trump. One-on-one, we need a legitimate government. Trudeau is not a legitimate Prime Minister. The Liberal government's not legitimate. It needs an election. It's past its due date. But would you agree that Poilievre's in a difficult position, because he doesn't want to come out and say, damn Donald Trump, because Donald Trump's doing some wonderful things right now in the United States. And if he says that, he's going to really anger and PO a lot of the base, including people who vote conservative because they really believe, as principled conservatives, it's the only place to go, or it's the only option they really have in terms of electing a leader. So, do you think Poilievre is in a difficult position right now?
He's in a horrible position, because of this potential looming trade war, and because of how the government right now, the Liberal government, is using, propaganda media, legacy media against him. I watch CBC, CTV, Global. I sit and have my morning coffee every morning, and I watch them, not because I want to torture myself mentally, but because I want to hear what they're saying. And I do hear what they're saying. They're using that same propaganda that they used throughout COVID, throughout the Freedom Convoy, against the narrative that the government wants them to use. And right now, the target is Donald Trump. And obviously, the Liberal polling has shown that that's raising their points a few points because of that fighting and because of that hate that they're spreading. Donald Trump was elected to look after the American people. He wasn't elected to look after the Canadian people. I wish people would remember that. And like I said, we need leadership in this country that cared enough about our country, and we wouldn't be in this position right now. Donald Trump obviously knows that Justin Trudeau needs to be removed as prime minister, and we need to get an election up here and have this happen. Justin Trudeau has disrespected Donald Trump multiple times on the world stage. And that, I don't think Donald Trump is going to forget about that. And so Donald right now is pushing for an election. He's actually, if he's done anything positive too for the Canadian people, he's actually patriotized a few of us, or the people that were sleeping, to take pride in that Canadian flag once again, like what we did in February of 2022. There's a lot of rallying right now. I just wish people would wake up to the fact that they're being fed a line of malarkey, and they need to wake up to what's actually going on. Our inflation in this country is caused by one thing right now. Our federal government, through the use of the carbon tax that's been imposed on us for a number of years now, not because of the 25 potential, percent trade war that's coming in because of Donald Trump. And if our politicians would have just listened to what Donald Trump was saying right from the start, I want the border crisis cleaned up, the fentanyl issue at the border, and the immigration, we could have resolved this issue right from day one, instead of them turning it into this big media propaganda campaign like what they've done in the last number of weeks.
Yeah, I totally agree. The border has been a problem for years. Justin Trudeau essentially had an open border policy for most of his years. As soon as he put out it was still called a tweet at the time. He said, "Come, the world, citizens of the world, refugees of the world, come to Canada. We have an open border." Then he put Bill Blair in charge of. I used to call him the open borders minister, and of course, this is the man who's now looking after a national defense. I can't take him seriously. I couldn't take him seriously as the police chief of Toronto Police Service. I can't take him seriously as the defense minister. But it worries me that Canadians have such a short memory on these things. And I'm looking at Mark Carney right now, and I I put a little vignette together for my broadcast, uh, comparing Mark Carney to a character in a Peter Sellers movie from 1979. One of my favorite films from Peter Sellers, where he plays basically somebody without a thought in his head, and who just repeats what he's seen on television. And when I watched Mark Carney at his opening leadership announcement in Edmonton, and I thought, this is bizarre. He's trying to make himself out to be this kid from Edmonton, a homegrown Canadian, just the average folk, even though he spent his life as a globalist. And I'm watching Mark Carney, and I'm saying, the guy has got absolutely nothing to say. He's literally reading from the same script that Justin Trudeau has been reading from, except he's borrowed some from Pierre Poilievre now. He's talking about, oh, I'd like a middle class tax cut. I'd like to balance the budget, but I'm still going to have a corporate carbon tax. And he's actually talking about a corporate or a carbon tax tariff now, which of course will be catastrophic. But I'm watching Mark Carney, and the mainstream media keeps saying, God, this guy's brilliant. This guy is just what we need in Canada. He is so reassuring. He is just so incredibly bright. And I think, am I missing something? No, I'm not. But do you find this mainstream media response to be both puzzling, but at the same time expected?
I'm surprised they didn't gush over Christina Freeland like they had been throughout the years. It's like, mainstream media has been told what to send out to the people, and that's exactly what we're doing right now. Mark Carney is not the answer, I don't believe, for the future of Canada. I believe if you look at his history throughout the banking system within the global world, he didn't do very many favors for the UK back in the day, as was stated, recently. Um, it's more of the same thing. And I had this argument with somebody on Twitter yesterday where, but Mark Carney's going to get rid of the carbon tax. You don't know what you're talking about, Chris. And I said, are you that simple in life not to understand that they're not going to get rid of the carbon tax? The Liberal government was the one that imposed this carbon tax. And who keeps increasing it every year on April 1st of all dates that should, tell everybody how much of a joke it really is in the real world. I ran a trucking company in this country. So the carbon tax has affected my bottom dollar on my business right from day one, and it keeps doing that. And basically what the carbon tax is going to do to my business is push me out within the next 10 years. I won't be able to afford the diesel fuel it takes to run my trucks up and down the highway. So that concerns me drastically.
Well, yeah, and I think it should concern all of us drastically. But uh, have you seen that clip with Mark Carney? He's asked about his corporate carbon tax, and of course, it sounds like, well, somebody else is going to pay for it, right? It's going to be these so evil polluters that he likes to
Yeah.
call corporations. Anybody who has to use carbon, and so it's going to be corporate. And he was asked, well, isn't there going to be a trickle down effect? Aren't they going to just pass that on to the consumer? And Mark Carney says, oh, don't worry. What about, and he said, well, what about steel? And of course, this was before the 25% tariff on steel was declared by Donald Trump on everybody in the world. And Mark Carney's response is mind boggling because he doesn't say, well, that's going to be a problem. He says, who uses steel anymore? And I said, this is a globalist who obviously is completely out of touch with not just ordinary people, but reality. And does he think we live in the Stone Age again? This is an age of steel. There is steel everywhere. Mark Carney doesn't seem to realize his car is constructed of steel, that the subways, the buses,
Buildings,
skyscrapers,
no.
your stove, your fridge, there's steel everywhere. And Mark Carney just says, well, no problem if it's trickled down because we don't use the stuff anymore. But what really worries me is he's talking about this tariff, this carbon tariff. Now, do you not think this is going to cause companies to say, the hell with doing business in Canada? Let's go to the States where there's no carbon tax and there's no carbon tariff, and we're going to do it there. So we could see a mass exodus of business from this country, and it's going to be bad enough. But the auto sector is going to be completely subsumed. But is this guy living in the real world?
He's more of the same, and he's always, I think, more of the same. They just found a new face to brandish for the Liberal Party of Canada to make people in Canada believe. Remember, this is another point I wanted to raise too. Remember years ago when Justin Trudeau came out and said, no, the carbon tax has nothing to do with the inflation costs on grocery prices. That's greedy corporations. Do you know how many people I have had conversations with in this country that think that because the loaf of bread is worth $2 more in the grocery store, that's because of greedy corporation and not because the federal government taxing the living daylights out of Canadians. That is a direct result of the carbon tax on inflation in this country. People wonder why they go to the grocery store right now and they can't afford half of the food that's in the grocery store. It's because of government over regulation and tax. Every time they up that carbon price, I have to up my freight rates in order to transport the things to the farmers. That's what I specialize in, is agriculture hauling. We haul everything from the combines to the sprayers to the air seeders that put the crop in the ground. When my cost goes up, I pass that cost off to my customer. That customer passes his cost off to that customer, and it's a trickle down effect. And a lot of people, they sleep and eat and breathe what the media tells them in this country as 100% facts. And I'm scared for the future of Canada when I watch legacy media have such a horrible effect on Canadians.
No, well, you and me both. And the CBC, of course, is facing extinction. And we're that. Well, no, that's not fair because I think it might be able to survive as a private entity, but it's facing the end of its huge subsidy of 1.3 trillion or billion dollars every year from from Canadian taxpayers. So it's fighting Poilievre very hard, and it's fighting to keep the Liberals in power. And as is a lot of the mainstream media. I've been watching the Globe and Mail, for instance, in the last week, and they have been every day. There's an opinion piece or an editorial saying how wonderful Mark Carney is. Yes, let's do this carbon tariff. Sounds wonderful. Let's do it. Let's get on board with Mark Carney. And of course, the Globe and Mail is taking subsidies from the Trudeau government, just as all of the legacy media are taking subsidies. So no wonder they love Mark Carney, because he appears to be gaining some ground. But I was really concerned the other night. Mark Carney was in Kelowna, which I've been to many times. I grew up, of course, on the west coast of BC. Spent many years there, and I know Kelowna fairly well. A lot of intelligent people in Kelowna, but unfortunately, they didn't show up at Mark Carney's rally the other night, because every time he said something incredibly stupid, there was vast applause. What I really found interesting is when Mark Carney said he was going to use, quote, the federal emergency powers to promote his economic agenda, which can mean just about anything. The crowd erupted into a and I thought, the guy's going to invoke the Emergencies Act. Those are the federal emergency powers. Did you see that the other night?
I did, yes, yeah, and like I said, when you hear the small applause, I don't think there was a lot of people there, of course, but
No.
this is our person. The government's pointing out, hey, sheep, this is who we need to vote for in the next election, and this is who's going to be your, interim prime minister, leader of Canada, who doesn't hold a sitting seat in Parliament right now. Just remember that. I mean, they'll fix that, of course they will. And then what you have to ask yourself after that too is, as soon as the government's sitting again, yet in March, will there be a vote of non-confidence to push Canadians to the poll to actually decide who we want to lead this country? And the question will always come back to Jagmeet Singh, whether he will actually have the balls this time, and I'll say it like exactly like that, the balls to stand up and vote yes to a non-confidence. And right now, I don't know if he's capable of doing that.
Yeah, he's once again, one day they're ready for a spring election, the next day he's not. And the latest is he's going to prepare for an early election because he believes Mark Carney wants an early election. But of course, Jagmeet has been tap dancing around this for quite some time. I don't know what he wants. So initially I thought it was just the pension. Well, he's got his pension date is come and gone. There's no way he's going to have an election before he gets his 6-year pension, which is coming up, I think, March the 6th. So there's no way we're gonna have an election before March the 6th. So he's safe that way. I don't know what he's after. I know the caucus, most of his caucus hates his guts now, because they're looking at him and saying the NDP is evaporating with our public support, largely because you can't make up your mind about anything. So every time he opens his mouth, you can just see the people behind him say, don't you dare say we're going to support Justin Trudeau and the Liberals again. I think, I think his days are numbered. He's not even going to win his own seat in the next election. And that's, he's polling almost in third place now, which is incredible. But I saw a poll yesterday from Abacus, because we've all been seeing these polls lately saying that the Liberals are gaining on the Conservatives. They're within 3 or 4 percentage points, and if they put Mark Carney in charge of the party, they're going to be tied with the Conservatives. And I saw this and I said, hey, let me look at this poll. Now it's 1,000 people. And it's not even really it wasn't even a scientific poll. It didn't even have a margin of error. So that when they don't have a margin of error, it's like, it's a call-in poll. Like, everybody who loves Mark Carney, please call in. But this was a legitimate pollster putting out this crap. And so I looked at the Abacus poll, 19 points. The Conservatives are 19 points ahead. I said, okay, that's more realistic. I think that's where we are. And I don't believe all Canadians are that stupid that they're going to embrace Mark Carney as being this wonderkind who's going to save the country. But Poilievre has got his work cut out for him this afternoon. This is a huge rally. But I think what he needs to do is talk about how a Conservative government is not just going to axe the carbon tax, because we know that. And a lot of Canadians think Mark Carney is, like the people you're arguing with. They're convinced Mark Carney is going to axe the carbon tax too. But I think Poilievre needs to lay out that it's not just the carbon tax, is that this country is so starved of freedom. And it's so overtaxed. Now, now we have a digital media tax every 4 months. There's another new tax in this country. And it's not just a carbon tax, even though that has been onerous and that's been destructive. But when Poilievre's at his best, I've said he reminds me a bit of Ronald Reagan, who used to appeal to people's optimism. He didn't spend his time saying, we're going to hell in a handbasket because of those damn liberals. He would say it's possible to move forward because we can still do it. We're a city on a hill. We have the people to do it. We have the economy. We don't need to punish ourselves. We don't need a government that constantly has its hands in her pocket. And when Poilievre appeals to me, it's when he talks about the government stopping stealing our money for its investments, for its spending on projects I don't believe in, and when he says, "Get out of my life," and he said this famously in a Rex Murphy interview. He said, "I want a government that minds its own business." And when I hear that, I go, "Yes, that's the candidate I want." I don't want a government telling me how to raise children, where I should go to church or not go to church, how I should think about social issues, telling me constantly the state should be raising families. I'm tired of Justin Trudeau putting the state in my life constantly. And I like the fact that Poilievre's at his best when he says we need a government that leaves us alone and minds its own business. And I think that is what he needs to do. And I think if he stays on that theme, the positive theme, I think he's going to win the biggest majority in history. And I think we'll be right back where we were before Justin Trudeau promised to resign and Mark Carney suddenly became this phenomena. What do you think?
I think Pierre Poilievre, like you said, he's got his work cut out for him right now. But I think it's within his grasp. I think what we need right now in this country is leadership. We need somebody that's going to stand up to the pole and say, you know what, government's gone too far. Like you said, we need to back off on this. And anything that Poilievre does, the liberal government will use, the Trump presidency to try and to tear him down. But what we need at the end of the day is we need less government. What was it, Pierre Elliott Trudeau that said government needs to stay out of Canadians' bedrooms? We're back to
No.
those days now. That has to stop. The amount of the government overreach, the amount of government control in this country has gone too far. People are taxed to the brink of extinction right now. You've got people, I'm not sure how these young kids right now can afford a house. I've got a 21-year-old son right now. When I was 21, I was looking for a wife. I was looking to have a family. I was looking to have a mortgage. That's not on his list right now. His priority right now is just making his basic bills every month and working as hard as he can in order to try and pay for that. There's no down payment for a house in the future right now. There's no plans for children because it's government has us so starved looking for the next paycheck. And a lot of Canadians are sitting like this. I was going to tell you this story of a young lady who was sitting at the reception area in a business that I work for, and she was extremely just happy because she got a check from the government in the mail for $200 for the carbon tax rebate. And it was a conversation we had to have with her to say, how much money did you pay in before you were able to get $200 back? You need to understand, people are so excited because they get a $200 check in the mail, but they don't understand they just paid $500 to the government in tax. They're taking your money and they're giving you a little bit back right now. This is exactly where we've went in this country. They did the same thing to us with GST back in the day as well. Carbon tax is yet another one on top of that. We're taxed to the brink of extinction in this country, and people need to wake up to that fact. And there's a better way. Like our healthcare system's in ruins right now. My wife has been dealing with an illness for the last up to 6 years, I believe now, we have no end in sight with this right now because of the healthcare system has just been jiggling us around. Now that's huge tax dollars that go into that, and a lot of Canadians are feeling the same way. There's a lot of people right now with huge ailments in this country, cancers and your heart disease, where they don't know if they're going to make it to the next appointment, but for the waiting list for an X-ray or for an MRI or a CT scan, and people should be concerned about that.
Yeah, they certainly should. We need a government that's concerned about it as well. And I wanted to leave the last word to you, I'll do that. I just wanted to say though, the Freedom Convoy was transformational for me. I never looked at politics the same way again. And I was covering it at the time for Human Events, and I was there every day. I interviewed you in the first couple of days, and I got to know a lot of the folks on the ground. And I said, "Where is the mainstream media?" And of course, they're all sitting in their warm offices. Well, those of us who really wanted to hear the truth were out there freezing with our hands getting frostbite. But it was worth it because I got to meet people like you and Tamara and others who were so dedicated to not your own freedom, but my freedom and this country's freedom. And I want to thank you again. And I've said that in print many times, but I want to say it right now. I want to thank you for your guts and determination in going out and doing what you did for the freedom of all Canadians at a time when we were being forced to take a vaccine, which we still have to say was safe and effective. But there's a lot of doubt about that now.
There is.
And thank you for what you did, because a lot of people didn't have the courage to do what you did. And thank you because you've gone through hell in the last year and a half through lawfare, going back and forth from Saskatchewan to Ottawa, going to a kangaroo court, going to as a political prisoner at times. But thank you for the work you've done, Chris. And I appreciate it. I know so many of my viewers who are watching right now love you and the work you did. Thank you again.
I appreciate the kind words there, David. It's been an honor, honestly, standing with people like you, getting to know people like you, and so many different Canadians across this country. I'm in the U.S. right now on a little bit of a trip here, and just walking into the hotel room this morning, I met somebody that said, "Good morning, thank you. How are you?" There's a lot of support across this country, across the world. We've woke people up all across the world, and I couldn't be prouder. I always like to say that out of all the things that have happened throughout Freedom Convoy, I probably grew the most. I look at some of my videos played on the courtroom in the evidence sector for the last 12 months of videos, and I would love to apologize to the judge for my use of language throughout my social media in my past. I remember back in my social media following was truckers, and that was basically my following. So language was usually something that I didn't care too much about and threw it around freely. And listening to my words in the courtroom there, I regret a lot of that. And I've done everything in my power to change that now. Anything I do for social media posts going forward. One of the biggest things that I noticed through Freedom Convoy was that there was a lot of young kids watching my social media posts, and they didn't need to hear that. So I always say that I probably grew the most throughout Freedom Convoy. I'm not an organizer. I'm not a protester. I'm not an activist. I'm just a blue collar truck driver. I run a famous red truck now, and every time I have that truck on the road, it's got the big Canada label down the hood on it, and I've people yelling at me on the radio. People, it's hard to make a mile because you've always got somebody that wants to stop and have a conversation. But I'm more than willing to do that. I've met so many amazing people across the country in the last 3 years, and I'm very appreciative for all the support we have. Tamara and I, like I said, the world's longest Mischief Trial in Canada, but we're still standing and we'll continue to stand. And come March 12th, regardless of the decision, I might lose the privilege to cross that border, because of a criminal charge on my record, or I might wind up with 10 years in federal prison, like what they're asking for right now. But we saved a lot of lives through Convoy, and we made a lot of the good friends, and woke a lot of people up. And for that, I'm eternally grateful. I hear these stories every day. I get messages from different people across the country just saying what a dark place people were in Canada throughout the convoy, or throughout the mandates, and we gave them light, and that was one of the biggest things that always brings me back to the point that we did the right thing. We're still standing. We continue to stand, and we'll stand no matter what happens in March.
Well, exactly. Very, very true words. And thanks for joining me today, Chris. I really appreciate it. And you're welcome to come back any time. I'm sorry it took so long to actually have you on the show, but thank you
No
for
worries.
joining me today. And we will see you in March. And I'm hoping and praying for a just verdict. I think we both know what that is. And all of people listening and watching know what a just verdict is. And I'm hoping and praying for that. And I'll see you in March, Chris. So thanks for joining me today.
Thanks for having me on, David. Remember, no matter what happens in March, we win.
Yes, you've demonstrated that already. Thank you for watching today, folks. This is David Creighton and Chris Barber for Stand on Guard. Please watch us again tomorrow at the same time, 10 o'clock. Thank you for being a part of this show today. Bye for now.